Hello, this is Jeff Lockridge with Connected Systems. Today I'll be talking about network as a service, how enterprises will be able to transform their automation capabilities through the offerings of the cloud service providers, or CSPs. As far as an agenda, I'll be talking about how ISPs have historically offered WAN services and what enterprises could do with those, the rise of these new CSP WAN services, and how that's transforming not only the WAN, but the enterprise's ability to automate the WAN. And then I'll cover final thoughts. Enterprise WAN, dating back to the last decade of the last century, you had a lot of telco offerings like private lines, frame relay, ATM. Enterprises built their WAN through those very much legacy technologies. In the mid to late 90s, companies emerged that were offering IPsec-based overlays. They sold those services. Enterprise consumed those as a vanilla layer 3 service. It seemed like a private backbone to the enterprises. As MPLS became popularized among the service providers used that technology to offer both layer 2 and layer 3 VPN service. In the last 10 years or so, as SD-WAN has become popular, SPs have offered those services. Enterprises could use commodity internet services instead of more expensive private lines or MPLS VPN circuits. Now, from an automation perspective, traditionally, these technologies were not very automation friendly. The automation was either primitive through expect or Perl or completely absent. I think we've all been there with the very early stages of automation, or lack of. Now, what caused this to be difficult was that these technologies were very much coupled to the physical constructs like hardware, like circuits. And that was very difficult to overcome. And the result was that these service provider offerings were very rigid with long lead times. You ordered a circuit, it took 6 weeks, month or more to deliver. Very structured offerings, like if you ordered a Lathe L3 VPN service, you had maybe an any-to-any connectivity model or a hub-spoke model. There was nothing really in between. Definitely a very rigid offering. In the last several years, the CSPs have begun offering WAN services that enterprises can consume. The initial offering was very much around the ability to host SD-WAN appliances on the CSP infrastructure, much of a roll your own SD-WAN type thing. These offerings are very much, let's say, maybe generational or iterative, where we've seen the initial offering and then it becomes enhanced. Sort of the second generation was that these CSPs would allow enterprises to use their backbone as enterprise WAN with do-it-yourself type methods. With SD-WAN, Transit Gateway, Direct Connect, you could take those constructs and build out your own WAN. That was enhanced, once again, to add things like DC to DC connectivity, global access using a single data center connection. Initially it was just you bought a private line to the cloud and you had access to only resources in that region. That evolved to that one link to a data center could offer connectivity to global resources, whether CSP or other enterprise data center resources. Now, what's emerged from these new offerings is a fully managed intent-based WAN. This CSP network as a service offering is very attractive to enterprises. It allows them to use these native constructs, Transit Gateway, Cloud WAN, to build an enterprise WAN fabric. And what that does is it streamlines the ability to connect data centers. I want to cover more about what this CSP network as a service means to enterprises. It allows them to use things like Transit Gateway, Cloud WAN, SiteLink, these native cloud constructs to build out an enterprise WAN fabric. And what that allows is enterprises to streamline the connectivity from data center to data center, from data center to cloud, from data center to branch offices. Becomes a much more flexible offering. The Cloud providers offer an abstraction layer that hides a lot of the complexities that were inherent in previous models. You're not configuring lots of things at an individual component level. You're not configuring, let's say, OSPF or those type of things. You're buying a service from one of the CSPs. Now, what do I mean when I say that you don't have to configure network elements at a component level? Let's give a concrete example. Let's say you have workloads in multiple VPCs in AWS, maybe have a couple in Azure, and you want those to communicate. If you consider what you have to do maybe 5-10 years ago to connect those workloads, you would have had to backhaul that traffic to some data center, configure either physical or virtual firewalls, routers, configure routing. There's lots of configuration you have to do to enable that connectivity. With the new mechanisms we have at our disposal, much of that is eliminated. Now, with this new WAN fabric that you're building out, it has very much the abilities to be automated at a level that you could not see previously. All interaction now with the CSP is API based. Previously you talked to one of the big telcos, you waited 6 weeks, you got what they delivered. Very much a manual interaction. Now it's all automated through APIs, through Terraform. We're seeing that a lot of times connectivity is described by policy. If you take AWS Cloud WAN, for example, connectivity between VPCs, cloud, and sites is all dictated by a JSON policy document. Now, this policy document that describes connectivity may not be all that familiar to traditional network engineers who are used to using either ACLs or routing to dictate connectivity. This is all in a JSON policy document. You can define things like, here is segment for maybe for HR, here's a segment for engineering, and here's how the connectivity between those segments looks like. This is how the different attachments should map to those segments. So it may not be all that familiar to traditional network engineers, but I feel like that will change. Here is an example policy document, a snippet at least. This is one for Cloud WAN. You can see that it defines certain segments, in this case development, and then what that segment can communicate with. You also see that there's a static route that's defined. I want to cover some of the things that are both good and bad about these new abilities and offerings. Customers can now replace or augment their existing WAN with CSP backbone. If you think about all the money that CSPs invest in their backbones, the speeds, enterprises can now leverage those investments to build out their own enterprise WAN fabric. That's very much a good thing. Now, on the slightly negative side, I feel that traditional network engineer jobs and enterprises might start shifting away more to the CSPs. You may no longer have the need to configure a million different knobs and OSPF and different network things the way that you used to. Now, very much a negative of the offerings is that there's still a huge lack of visibility. The observability piece is very much lacking, and that definitely makes troubleshooting a hard thing. In addition, the ability to do things multi-cloud is a little bit challenging. Fortunately, there are companies like Alkira that do simplify that. Now, what does all this mean to enterprises? I mentioned that enterprises can use these new offerings to build out fully automated enterprise WAN fabric. That is very flexible. You can make changes on the fly. That definitely comes at a price. So you are paying a premium to the CSPs for this flexibility. This enterprise WAN fabric, you don't have to automate deployment configuration of individual network devices. It's all being replaced by infrastructure as code in Terraform. You configure a Terraform template that describes the WAN connectivity, sometimes including JSON policy documents, and you run the Terraform to make that happen. A lot of these solutions are very much developer-centric as opposed to network engineering-centric. You could see things like Transit Gateway initially kind of looked like VRFs, maybe familiar to network engineers. That evolved into Cloud WAN, which was much more developer-centric. You described the connectivity not in terms of routing domains, but in terms of a JSON policy document. One interesting aspect of this is think about the opportunities this provides or this offers for ephemeral WAN connectivity. Let's say you have a conference or an event. What if you wanted to establish WAN connectivity just for that? Or if you want to establish WAN connectivity during certain times of night for doing backup? These new technologies give you the ability to do that. Also interesting, I feel, is the ability to do near instantaneous DR. You didn't have that capability previously. All right, in conclusion, I feel like these new offerings will increase the demand for cloud automation skills. You'll need folks who can write Terraform templates, who can write CloudFormation and those type of infrastructures as code. I feel like these new offerings and the ability to automate them gives the DevOps groups at the enterprises the ability to absorb networking in a way that was previously not possible. I always felt like networking was the laggard in getting on the DevOps train. That is going to change. And then last, I mentioned the lacking visibility. This really needs to improve in order for enterprises to be able to use technologies to troubleshoot, to fix things when they break. I recommend that all enterprise architects consider how network as a service and the automation that accompanies it can transform enterprise WAN connectivity. Thank you for listening. If you would like guidance on designing enterprise WAN using the CSP network as a service offerings, contact Connecty today.